The live stream was supposed to be like any other. Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, was sitting in a sleek, modern studio, surrounded by tech enthusiasts and reporters. His face, as usual, was serious, but there was an energy in the air that was palpable. Today wasn't just another day in the life of the world's most famous entrepreneur. This would be the day that his audience learned a dark secret. And no one could have predicted what he was about to say. A few moments into the broadcast, Elon paused and leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing every detail of his thoughtful expression. The crowd fell silent. Musk, ever the visionary, was known for making bold statements, but this one would take the world by surprise. "I've spent my life trying to push humanity forward, whether it's in space, in energy, or in transportation," Elon began. His voice, calm yet serious, carried through the speakers. "But there's something I need to talk about today that's been eating at me for a while. Something I've never said publicly before." The tension in the room was immediate. Reporters whispered among themselves. What was this revelation? What could Musk possibly have to say that would be so monumental? "The video game industry," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's not what it seems. In fact, it's far darker than you've been led to believe. The games we all love. They have a dark side that no one is talking about." The words hung in the air, leaving the audience in stunned silence. A few gasps could be heard as the implication settled in. Elon Musk had just declared that something millions of people cherished might be dangerous, perhaps even damaging. "What do I mean by that?" Elon asked, rhetorically. "The gaming world has become a machine, one designed not just for entertainment, but for addiction. Every choice you make in a game, every move you take, is carefully engineered to get you hooked. And it's not just about the gameplay, it's about money. Billions of dollars are being made off of microtransactions, loot boxes, and a system designed to take your time, your money, and your attention. And it's not by accident. It's intentional." The cameras panned across the room. Some faces in the crowd looked shocked, others skeptical, but the atmosphere was charged. Musk had just thrown down a gauntlet, and it was clear that he wasn't going to back down. "Let's take a step back. Think about the games you've played. How many times have you felt the rush of buying something in-game? A new skin for your character, a special weapon, maybe even something as small as a new emote? Those purchases are designed to feel irresistible. They're the result of months, even years, of research into human psychology." Musk paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But it's not just about buying things. It's about something far more insidious," he said, his voice dropping lower. "What happens when you can't stop playing? When you end up spending more money than you planned, more time than you thought you would? What if I told you that some of these game developers know exactly how to manipulate you, and they use that knowledge to keep you coming back for more? To make sure that your brain's reward system is firing, triggering the urge to spend even more money." Elon Musk wasn't just revealing a corporate scandal. He was exposing a hidden truth about an industry that had, for decades, operated with relative impunity. And now, he was daring to hold up a mirror to it. The backlash, Musk knew, would be fierce. The gaming community was known for being passionate, and many players would take offense at what he was saying. The comments section below the live stream was already exploding with activity. "Is this for real? Musk is going after video games now," one user typed, with a mix of disbelief and amusement. "This is ridiculous. Video games are a way for people to relax, not some evil plot." Another comment read, "I don't know what he's talking about, but he's always been right about tech stuff. Maybe we need to listen." Musk's comments weren't just directed at casual gamers. He was aiming at an entire industry, one that stretched across the globe, generating hundreds of billions of dollars every year. But in doing so, he was also setting himself up for an all-out war with some of the world's biggest gaming companies. These companies were some of the most powerful entities in entertainment, and Musk's revelations could ignite a firestorm of opposition. Maybe you don't want to hear this. Maybe you've been enjoying your games, and I'm ruining it for you. But the truth is, it's not all fun and games anymore, Musk said, his voice steady but forceful. And it's time we start having a real conversation about what's going on behind the scenes. What's the cost of this kind of entertainment? Is it worth it when we're talking about addiction, money, and manipulation? And what happens when it's not just the kids who are being affected, but the adults too? Are we all just pawns in someone else's game? The live stream continued, but for many viewers, the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon added, signaling the end of his shocking announcement. The comments flooded in from around the world. Some were angry, others were intrigued, but no one could ignore what Musk had just laid bare. Whether you agreed with him or not, there was no denying that his words had opened a door to something bigger, something far deeper. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's relationship with video games was not the typical story one might expect from the world's most innovative tech mogul. Unlike many of his peers, who grew up immersed in the world of gaming, Musk's early exposure was minimal. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, in the 1970s and 1980s, video games were not a ubiquitous part of everyday life. He had access to fewer resources than most American kids, and his family didn't have the luxury of owning gaming consoles or PCs at home. Yet, despite these limitations, the spark for gaming and technology had already been lit in Musk's mind. As a child, Musk was captivated by the world of computers and technology. At the age of 10, he taught himself programming by reading books. His first breakthrough came when he developed a simple video game called Blaster at the age of 12, a space-themed shooter game reminiscent of Space Invaders. He sold the game for $500 to a computer magazine. While the game itself was rudimentary by modern standards, Musk was hooked. The experience opened his eyes to the potential of technology, and how it could be used to both entertain and educate. But Blaster wasn't the start of Musk's relationship with gaming, it was merely a precursor. As he grew older and moved to Canada and then to the US to attend school, Musk began to understand the global impact of video games. The early 90s brought with it the era of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Musk had access to these consoles in college, and his friends introduced him to the joys of Super Mario Bros., Street Fighter, and other arcade classics. For Musk, video games were an interesting blend of escapism and engineering. He wasn't just a player, he was a curious observer. He marveled at the technology behind the games, the level of detail in their design, and the way in which they could transport people to different worlds. His fascination wasn't limited to the games themselves but extended to the technology powering them. Years later, as Musk began to rise in prominence in the world of tech and space exploration, video games became a source of both inspiration and frustration. With his involvement in cutting-edge industries, Musk saw firsthand how quickly the gaming industry was evolving. The technical innovations in games were impressive, especially as computer graphics and artificial intelligence improved. But as he became more familiar with the psychology of human behavior, Musk began to notice something disturbing, the darker side of video games. He wasn't the only one who began to recognize it. As gaming continued to grow, with franchises like Call of Duty, Fortnite, and Candy Crush, the industry started shifting towards an ever-increasing reliance on microtransactions. Loot boxes, in-game purchases, and other monetization strategies became common features. What was once an activity meant for pure entertainment was slowly turning into a money-making machine, one designed to keep players engaged at all costs. By the time Musk had reached the pinnacle of his career, overseeing groundbreaking companies like Tesla and SpaceX, the influence of video games was undeniable. And yet, the social consequences of this industry were far more complex than he had anticipated. Musk was no stranger to the pressures of capitalism. After all, his own companies were built on the same kind of drive for profit. But the more he saw, the more concerned he became with how the gaming industry's focus on profit was influencing players. One particular event caused Musk to reflect on his own relationship with gaming. He had recently spent a weekend playing Battlefield with his friends, a competitive first-person shooter that attracted millions of players. Musk was no stranger to the appeal of these games. He enjoyed the action, the thrill, and the strategy. However, what he didn't expect was the frustration and, ultimately, the realization that the game was manipulating him. It wasn't just the challenging gameplay that kept him coming back. Musk realized that every time he logged in, there was a subtle pressure to buy new in-game skins, special items, or boosters that would enhance his experience. The developers, in their design, had perfected the art of tapping into the psychology of addiction. Every small purchase, every slight victory, was engineered to trigger a rush of dopamine. Musk began to feel that this wasn't just a game anymore. It was a business model masquerading as entertainment. As Musk dug deeper, his thoughts became darker. He saw the way Fortnite and other free-to-play games used the concept of FOMO, the fear of missing out, to compel players to spend money. He understood the way games played with the human brain, using the same techniques often found in casinos and gambling machines. The subtle ways that a player's sense of achievement, belonging, and self-worth was tied to their in-game purchases, it was all too familiar. He had seen similar tactics in consumer-driven industries before, but this time, it felt more personal. It was then that Elon Musk realized the importance of his next step. He was no longer just an observer of the gaming world, he was a part of it. And what's more, he had the platform and influence to bring about change. The problem was bigger than just one game, or one developer. It was a systemic issue that pervaded the entire industry. Musk knew that if he was going to make a real impact, he had to take a stand. But doing so would be a dangerous game. He could risk his reputation, his relationships with other tech giants, and perhaps even his own companies. Yet, in his heart, Musk felt compelled to act. He knew that the ethical consequences of allowing this addiction to spread unchecked were too great to ignore. It was time to speak out. It was time to expose the truth, even if it meant alienating part of the world he had worked so hard to build. With that, Musk made a decision. He was going to address the dark side of gaming head-on. The live stream, the comments, and the flood of reactions were only the beginning. There would be much more to come. Elon Musk knew that his live-streamed confession was only the first step in a much larger battle. What had started as a shocking reveal had quickly turned into a media frenzy. The gaming world, from developers to hardcore fans, was in an uproar. Some called him a hypocrite, others claimed he didn't understand the appeal of video games, and a few even accused him of trying to ruin a beloved pastime. But Musk had anticipated this. In fact, he welcomed it. It was the beginning of the conversation he had been waiting for, a conversation that could change the course of the entire industry. Musk wasn't just some random figure with an opinion on gaming. His influence was far-reaching. He had the power to reshape how people thought about technology, entertainment, and the complex intersection of the two. And now, he was about to use that power to take on the gaming industry at its very core. After the broadcast, he sat alone in his office at Tesla, the quiet hum of the air conditioning filling the room. His mind was racing. His revelation had caused an undeniable ripple effect, but he knew it wasn't enough. The public needed more. People needed to understand exactly what was at stake. He couldn't just point fingers at the gaming world without offering a solution. He wasn't one for vague criticisms. Musk was a problem solver, and now he had a problem to solve. That night, he reached out to his closest advisors, a small, trusted group of experts from both the tech and entertainment industries. He needed their help to create a detailed, systematic breakdown of what was really going on behind the scenes of the gaming world. Musk's goal wasn't just to expose the problems, but to offer a roadmap for change. It would be a difficult task, but Musk wasn't afraid of challenges. The following morning, a confidential meeting was set up at Tesla's headquarters. Musk's team consisted of engineers, psychologists, and even former game developers who had worked on some of the biggest franchises in the world. They gathered around a table, laptops open, ready to dive into the problem. Musk wasted no time. "We're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar industry," he began, his voice steady, "but it's not just about the money. It's about the manipulation. It's about exploiting the human mind to keep players hooked, to make sure they keep spending, keep playing, keep coming back for more." One of his advisors, Dr. Laura Williams, a cognitive psychologist who had worked in tech for years, nodded in agreement. "The thing about video games is that they're designed to tap into some very deep psychological triggers, dopamine, reward systems, the need for achievement. These aren't just games anymore, they're psychological experiences. Players are actively conditioned to chase rewards." Musk glanced at her, intrigued. "So you're saying it's not just about entertainment? It's about addiction?" "Exactly," Dr. Williams replied. "And the biggest issue is that it's not just a casual addiction. We're talking about a long-term, ingrained habit. Games like Fortnite or League of Legends aren't just games, they're ongoing, never-ending experiences. They're always evolving, always changing, so the player is always left wanting more. And then there's the monetization aspect, loot boxes, microtransactions, skins. Every time a player invests, they feel a sense of progress, even if it's entirely artificial." Musk leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing in thought. He had known the gaming industry had evolved, but he hadn't fully grasped the extent of this psychological manipulation. So, the games are engineered to keep players in a loop of constant spending and playing. And this isn't just happening in one or two games, it's an industry-wide practice. Dr. Williams nodded. "Exactly. And it's not just the games themselves, it's the whole ecosystem around them. Social media influencers, streamers, online communities, all of them feed into this system, creating a sense of FOMO, making players feel like they need to be part of the conversation, to keep up with the latest trends. The games themselves create a social dynamic that pushes players to spend more and play longer." Musk's mind was racing. He had known about the addictive nature of some games, but hearing it laid out so plainly was unsettling. This wasn't just a matter of a few bad apples, this was a systemic issue that permeated the entire industry. One of the former game developers in the room, Michael Stewart, spoke up. "You've got to understand, Elon, this is how the industry makes its money. It's not about creating a fun experience anymore. It's about keeping players invested for as long as possible. The longer they play, the more they spend." Musk turned to him. "So, are you telling me that these game companies, some of the biggest in the world, are knowingly exploiting people for profit?" Michael hesitated for a moment. "Not all of them, but many do. And the thing is, it's not just the developers. It's also the platform providers like Apple and Google. They get a cut of every in-game transaction. It's a whole ecosystem built on keeping players hooked and maximizing profits." Musk's expression hardened. "That's a problem. It's not just unethical, it's dangerous. We're talking about an entire generation being raised in an environment designed to make them addicted to gaming. That's a culture I can't stand behind." The room was silent for a moment. Musk's words hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew this was a battle that would require more than just exposing the truth. They would need to build a case so compelling that it would spark real change. "All right," Musk said, his voice decisive. "We need to create a manifesto. A plan to expose the manipulation and the exploitation within the gaming industry. We need to make the public aware of what's really going on. But more than that, we need to offer solutions. If we can change the way people see gaming, if we can push for ethical design, then maybe we can save this generation from a future of addiction." The team nodded in agreement, already gathering research and making plans for the public release of their findings. Musk's mission had become clear. He wasn't just going to expose the truth about gaming. He was going to lead the charge for reform. As the meeting broke up and the team dispersed to work on their individual tasks, Musk sat back in his chair, contemplating the gravity of what lay ahead. The gaming industry was about to face a reckoning, and Elon Musk, once a casual gamer, was now at the forefront of it all. The days following the meeting at Tesla were a blur for Elon Musk. Every hour was consumed by strategizing, organizing, and preparing for the big reveal. The manifesto that he and his team had crafted was a damning indictment of the gaming industry, meticulously outlining how the addiction-fueled design of many popular games was undermining the well-being of players worldwide. Musk knew that releasing the manifesto wouldn't be easy. It would spark outrage, not only among the gaming community but also within the tech industry itself. This wasn't just a conversation about video games, it was a direct challenge to the business model of some of the world's most profitable companies. But Musk was resolute. He understood the risks, but he also saw the opportunity. If he could expose the darkness lurking behind the glitz and glamour of the gaming world, perhaps he could catalyze the change he so desperately believed was needed. And if he was going to do it, he would do it right. He wasn't merely trying to disrupt the industry for the sake of disruption, he wanted to ignite a movement that could change the course of entertainment forever. The first step was the press conference. Musk had always been a showman when it came to unveiling new technology or ideas, but this time, the stakes were higher. His decision to reveal the gaming manifesto wasn't just about shining a light on the gaming industry's issues, it was about making a statement. The public had to understand that the world of video games was no longer just a space for fun and leisure. It was an ecosystem built on manipulation, control, and addiction. The day of the press conference, Musk stood in front of a crowded room filled with reporters, bloggers, and tech influencers. Cameras flashed, and the buzz of excitement filled the air. Musk was no stranger to being in the spotlight, but this time, the energy was different. This wasn't a grand unveiling of a new Tesla model or a groundbreaking announcement about SpaceX. This was something much more personal. This was a direct confrontation with an industry he had once been enamored with. He began with a simple question: what if I told you that the games you love, the ones that dominate your phones and consoles, were designed to manipulate you, to keep you coming back for more, and to make sure you spent as much money as possible? The room fell silent. He continued. The gaming industry today is not just about entertainment, it's about addiction. It's about exploiting human psychology for profit. The very design of these games, the rewards, the constant dopamine hits, the social pressures, all of it is engineered to keep you playing and spending. And while that might be good for the bottom line of developers, it's devastating for the players. Musk paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I've seen it firsthand. I've been addicted to these games myself. And I've realized that it's not just the developers at fault, it's the entire system. The model is broken. And it's time we had an honest conversation about it. The crowd was stunned. Many of the reporters had expected the usual tech talk, the polished charisma of Elon Musk unveiling the future. Instead, they were met with a raw, unflinching critique of an industry that had long been seen as untouchable. Musk had just set the stage for a battle that would have global implications. As the press conference continued, Musk unveiled the manifesto that his team had worked on. It was a 40-page document, carefully researched and meticulously detailed, outlining the psychological tactics used by game developers to keep players hooked. It included sections on the science of addiction, the role of in-game microtransactions, and the dangers of long-term exposure to these games. The manifesto also included a call to action, a demand for more ethical game design, the regulation of microtransactions, and the promotion of healthier gaming habits. Musk didn't just want to expose the problem, he wanted to solve it. And while the manifesto was a call for change, it was also a blueprint for a new way forward. Musk's team had outlined a series of reforms that included transparent in-game purchasing systems, limits on playtime to prevent addiction, and a new focus on creating games that prioritize the well-being of players over profits. The manifesto was quickly distributed to media outlets, and within hours, it was trending across social media platforms. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some hailed Musk as a hero, calling him the voice of reason in an industry that had gone off the rails. Others saw him as a villain, someone who was trying to destroy their favorite pastime and disrupt an industry that had brought so much joy to their lives. In the weeks that followed, the gaming world was thrown into turmoil. Game developers, some of the biggest names in the industry, began to respond. They issued statements defending their practices, arguing that microtransactions and other monetization strategies were necessary to keep their games free to play and accessible to a global audience. Some dismissed Musk's claims outright, accusing him of misunderstanding the nature of gaming and the business side of the industry. But there were cracks in the armor. Smaller, independent developers, who had long been critical of the industry's practices, began to lend their voices to Musk's cause. They pointed to the success of games that prioritized player well-being over profit, offering examples of games that used ethical design principles without relying on exploitative tactics. Musk's message had struck a chord, and the conversation was gaining momentum. But it wasn't without its challenges. The gaming community, for the most part, was divided. Hardcore gamers, those who had spent years immersed in the world of Call of Duty, Fortnite, and League of Legends, weren't ready to accept that their beloved games were built on a foundation of manipulation. And then there were the influencers, those who made their living from promoting these games, many of whom had deep financial ties to the industry. Musk knew that changing the gaming industry wouldn't be easy. It wasn't just about winning over the players, it was about confronting an entire system that had been built on exploiting them. And that, he realized, was going to take more than just a manifesto. It was going to take a movement. The battle for the future of gaming had officially begun. But Elon Musk was ready. Elon Musk had been in the public eye for years, navigating controversies and facing opposition in nearly every sector he entered. But this was different. The response to his manifesto had been louder, more divided, and far more personal than he had anticipated. What had started as a bold critique of the gaming industry's exploitation of players had morphed into a battle that was threatening to engulf him on all sides. The gaming world, once a space Musk had merely observed as a casual player, had now turned into a battleground. Some of the industry's most powerful figures were coming for him. Their weapons were scathing rebuttals, accusations of ignorance, and attacks on his credibility. He was being painted as someone who didn't understand gaming, someone who was threatening the very culture that millions of people held dear. The backlash came in waves. It started with a series of open letters published by major game developers. These letters defended the business practices Musk had criticized, claiming that microtransactions and in-game purchases were essential for maintaining free-to-play games and ensuring the growth of the industry. According to these developers, the system Musk was condemning was the future of gaming, and anyone who disagreed was simply stuck in the past. One such open letter came from Thomas Reeve, the CEO of a major gaming company, Ether Games, whose title Eternal War had grossed over $1 billion in revenue. Reeve's letter was a direct attack on Musk's statement, accusing him of misrepresenting the purpose of monetization in video games. While I respect Mr. Musk for his contributions to technology, his understanding of gaming culture seems to be incredibly shallow, Reeve's letter read. Gaming is a global community. It's a creative industry that supports millions of jobs worldwide. The economic models that Mr. Musk denounces allow us to create the games that people love, and his critique of these practices only undermines the hard work of the thousands of talented individuals behind these projects. The letter was just the beginning. Soon, gaming forums, Twitter feeds, and Reddit threads were flooded with passionate arguments. Musk's critics, many of whom were longtime gamers and influencers, began flooding the digital space with their rebuttals. For some, the industry's business model was an accepted norm, one they had grown used to. For others, it was a lucrative career, one they couldn't afford to see disrupted. But Musk wasn't surprised. He had anticipated this level of resistance. He had expected pushback from the industry's power players, the developers, the investors, the streamers. These were people who had a stake in maintaining the status quo, people whose profits depended on perpetuating the cycle of addiction and consumption. What surprised him, however, was the sheer intensity of the personal attacks. The gaming community, the very people he had hoped to protect, were now calling him a hypocrite, a sellout, and worse. It seemed as though Musk's vision for a healthier gaming world had been drowned out by the noise of an industry that had been built on quick fixes and short-term profit. It was clear, Musk wasn't just challenging a business model, he was challenging a way of life. The days following the backlash were filled with meetings, calls, and endless media coverage. Musk knew he had to take a stand. He couldn't let the conversation spiral into chaos. He needed to show the world that he wasn't just making baseless claims. There was science behind his words, and the evidence was irrefutable. He would fight back, and this time, he would do it with facts. To fortify his position, Musk reached out to his trusted advisor, Dr. Laura Williams, the cognitive psychologist who had worked with him on analyzing the addictive elements of modern games. She had become an integral part of his team, offering insight into the psychological effects of gaming and helping to craft a more scientific approach to the argument. They decided to release a series of research-backed reports that would give hard data to support Musk's claims. The first report would focus on the neurological effects of prolonged gaming, including the brain's reward system and how game developers were deliberately exploiting these mechanisms to keep players hooked. The second report would dive into the financial aspects, highlighting the ways in which microtransactions, loot boxes, and other monetization strategies disproportionately targeted vulnerable populations, including children and those with addictive personalities. The reports were painstakingly put together, with the help of a team of neuroscientists and financial experts. Musk's goal was to make the case undeniable. He wasn't going to just challenge the business model anymore, he was going to show the world exactly how dangerous it was. He would no longer be just a critic, he would be a crusader. Once the reports were ready, Musk did what he did best, he went public. He released the first report through his social media channels, carefully crafting a statement to accompany it. He wanted to make sure his followers understood that this wasn't just an opinion, it was an issue of public health. The video game industry is not just a source of entertainment anymore, Musk's tweet read. It has become a multi-billion-dollar addiction machine that preys on the psychological weaknesses of millions. We've known about the dangers of addiction for decades, but we've allowed it to flourish unchecked. It's time to face the truth. The tweet went viral. The report itself was dissected by media outlets and shared by influencers who, while skeptical, were compelled by the research Musk had presented. It wasn't a full solution, but it was a start. And then came the second report. It was even more damning. It broke down, in excruciating detail, how the economic model of microtransactions and loot boxes were designed to target vulnerable individuals. It explained how these strategies not only affected kids, but also adults with addictive behaviors, who were often spending far more money than they could afford. Musk's second tweet attached to the report was even more direct: "This is what's happening. This is how your money is being stolen. The game you love isn't just a game, it's an investment scheme built to keep you hooked. Let's stop pretending it's not." The response was swift. The media storm only intensified. Critics and supporters were in a frenzy, but Musk's message was clear: he was no longer going to be passive. He was going to bring the fight to the gaming industry's doorstep, and he had the facts to back it up. But while Musk was rallying public support, the real battle was just beginning. The gaming giants weren't going to back down without a fight. They were preparing their own counterattack, one that would aim to discredit Musk and his movement. It was clear that this would be a war for the future of gaming. The storm had arrived. Elon Musk could feel the waves of anger and resentment crashing against him as the gaming giants mobilized their forces. The gaming world, once a relatively niche sector in the entertainment industry, had become a juggernaut, and Musk had just taken a direct swing at its foundations. The backlash from developers, players, and influencers had reached a fever pitch. But Musk was no stranger to controversy. He had faced firestorms before, but this was different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Within days of releasing his reports, Musk's name was everywhere. The internet had exploded with a frenzy of arguments, debates, and rebuttals. Major publications, both in gaming and in mainstream media, were now discussing his manifesto and the two research reports. But the question on everyone's mind was, what was Musk going to do next? Was this just another one of his wild ideas, or was he really serious about changing the world of gaming? The gaming companies had quickly rallied together, realizing that the pressure Musk was putting on them could alter the very nature of their business models. At first, they dismissed Musk's claims as an exaggeration, an outsider's misunderstanding of an industry they had spent decades building. But as the reports gained traction, it became evident that Musk wasn't going to back down. The industry's leaders had no choice but to launch their own counterattack. The most powerful figure to speak out against Musk was Thomas Reeve, the CEO of Ether Games, one of the largest gaming companies in the world. Reeve was a familiar face in the industry, a seasoned executive who had guided the company through multiple financial booms. His words carried weight, and when he spoke, people listened. Reeve's response came in the form of a detailed rebuttal published on Ether Games' official website. It was an open letter that aimed to address Musk's claims head-on. The letter not only dismissed Musk's reports but also tried to discredit the validity of the research, calling it fundamentally flawed and misleading. We understand that Mr. Musk is passionate about his beliefs, but his attempt to demonize the gaming industry lacks the depth and understanding necessary to have a meaningful conversation, the letter began. Gaming is an art form, a cultural experience that brings people together. The accusation that we are somehow manipulating our players is offensive. The systems we implement, microtransactions, loot boxes, and other features, are simply tools that allow us to offer free content to millions of players worldwide. The game industry's economic model supports not only the creators and developers but also the countless individuals employed by this industry, from artists to programmers to marketers. Reeve's letter continued with a counterargument focused on the success of Ether Games and other major titles. Our games are some of the most played in the world. Eternal War, for example, has a player base of over 150 million, and it has revolutionized the way games can interact with audiences. We have created a sustainable ecosystem that benefits everyone involved, from the players to the developers to the global gaming community. The letter then called Musk's claims dangerous and warned that attempting to disrupt the gaming model would lead to severe consequences. If Musk gets his way, the very games that millions of people around the world enjoy could disappear. The future of gaming will be shaped by those who understand the complex balance between entertainment, art, and commerce. Elon Musk is not one of those people. Musk had expected this kind of response, but the venom in Reeve's words stung. Reeve had made it personal, attacking Musk's credibility and framing the debate as one of ignorance versus understanding. Musk's critics, especially those entrenched in the gaming world, had latched onto Reeve's statement. Many were quick to amplify his words across social media platforms. The hashtag #MuskDoesn'tGetIt began trending on Twitter, and memes mocking Musk's misguided efforts flooded the internet. Despite the vitriol, Musk refused to remain passive. If anything, the personal attacks only fueled his determination. He knew that the world of gaming was a delicate ecosystem, but it was also an ecosystem that had grown far too comfortable in its exploitative ways. He wasn't about to let the narrative slip out of his control. In response to Reeve's letter, Musk posted a tweet that was direct and pointed. Fact: the games you love are designed to keep you hooked. Not for your enjoyment, but for profit. The question isn't whether you like these games, it's whether you understand what's really happening behind the scenes. The truth will come out. It wasn't just words. Musk had also enlisted the help of several influential figures outside of gaming, experts from the fields of psychology, addiction research, and even former industry insiders who were willing to speak out about the darker side of gaming. The narrative that Musk was pushing wasn't just emotional, it was factual, supported by experts and research. And he was going to make sure the world saw it. Musk's second wave of media appeared in the form of video interviews and podcasts. He sat down with well-known hosts in the tech and culture space, including Lex Fridman and Joe Rogan, to discuss the addiction problem in gaming. These interviews were not just a platform for Musk to air his views but an opportunity to dive deeper into the specifics of the psychological manipulation that had been woven into the fabric of modern games. In one particularly striking moment, Musk discussed his personal experiences with gaming addiction. He revealed how, at one point, he had become hooked on a popular mobile game, Clash Royale, spending hours daily immersed in its microtransaction-driven mechanics. "I got caught up in the dopamine hits," he admitted. "I didn't realize it at first, but the more I played, the more I spent. It was like I couldn't stop. I wasn't playing for fun, I was playing because the game was designed to keep me coming back." That's the thing about these systems, they know how to trigger your brain's reward system. The personal nature of Musk's story resonated with many people. It humanized the issue, showing that even someone as brilliant and successful as Musk was vulnerable to the very systems he was now fighting against. The interviews and reports soon found their way into mainstream media outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian, which gave Musk's crusade a larger platform. His fight was no longer confined to the gaming world, it had spilled over into the general public. While the gaming industry's defenders continued to rally against him, the general public's response was mixed. Many people, especially parents and concerned citizens, started to voice their support for Musk's movement, agreeing that the current gaming system was unhealthy and needed change. Musk was gaining traction. But the battle was far from over. The next step in Musk's plan was clear: he was going to leverage his position at the helm of Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures to put pressure on the gaming industry's financial backers. If he could convince major investors to rethink their support for companies that perpetuated addictive gaming practices, he could force the industry to change from the top down. The real fight was just beginning, and Musk was preparing for the next phase of his crusade. As the gaming industry's counterattack raged on, Elon Musk found himself in a peculiar position. The initial pushback had been fierce, and while the attacks from major developers like Thomas Reeve had stung, they had also proven something to him: the gaming world wasn't prepared to change. It had dug in its heels, relying on the same tired arguments to defend its exploitative practices. But Musk wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially when the stakes were high. What Musk had underestimated, however, was how deeply ingrained the gaming industry's methods had become, even in the hearts of players who loved the games. The more time he spent listening to the debate, the more he realized something: to truly make an impact, he needed a different approach. He couldn't just keep fighting the behemoth of the gaming industry from the outside. He needed allies, people who understood the inner workings of the industry and were equally frustrated by its practices. That's when he received a call from an unexpected source. It was a late afternoon when Musk's phone rang. His assistant passed the phone to him, and he was surprised to hear the voice on the other end. It was Samantha Riley, a former lead developer from Arcadia Studios, a company that had been one of the biggest names in the industry until it shuttered a few years earlier. Riley had been at the forefront of creating some of the most successful titles in the early days of microtransactions but had since become disillusioned with the way the industry had evolved. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I've been following what you've been doing, and I think we can work together. There's a lot more to this than just addiction. The entire system is broken from the ground up, and if we want to fix it, we have to change the way these companies think about their players." Musk's interest peaked. Samantha Riley was not just any former developer, she had been a visionary in her field. Under her leadership, Arcadia Studios had created some of the first games to successfully integrate microtransactions without overtly alienating players. However, her frustrations with how these systems had evolved led her to leave the industry. She had become a vocal critic of the growing monetization tactics that were creeping into every game. They set up a meeting the following week, and Musk could already sense that this conversation could be a game changer. When they met in person, Riley wasted no time. She came straight to the point. "Elon, I've seen how these developers work," she said. "They're brilliant when it comes to creating worlds and stories, but they're losing sight of what gaming is all about. It's not just about making money. It's about providing an experience, something people can connect with. The current model of exploitation is a cancer that's growing inside the industry, and it's hurting not just the players, but the developers too. I've watched so many talented people burn out trying to create games that are meant to engage players, only to be forced to prioritize profits over creativity. Musk nodded. This was the message he had been trying to convey all along, but hearing it from someone with first-hand experience in the industry added a layer of legitimacy he couldn't ignore. Riley continued, explaining that she had spent years in the trenches, watching as corporate greed had overshadowed creative ambition. Developers, she argued, were no longer allowed to focus on creating meaningful games, they were now pushed to implement systems designed to make players spend as much money as possible, often with little regard for the long-term health of the player base. Here's the thing, Riley said, leaning forward. The gaming community isn't just full of addicts. It's full of passionate, creative people who love games for the experience they provide. We're losing sight of that, and the players are suffering. If we want to fix this, we have to completely overhaul how the industry operates. We can't keep treating players like customers. We need to treat them like people. Riley's words resonated deeply with Musk. This wasn't just about addiction anymore, it was about restoring integrity to an industry that had lost its way. He could see the potential of a partnership with Riley. She understood the inner workings of the gaming world in ways that Musk could never truly grasp on his own. She had the expertise, the insight, and the credibility to make a real change. They quickly got to work on a new initiative. Together, they began planning a series of conferences, interviews, and research reports, this time with a focus on the long-term damage that microtransactions and exploitative business models were doing to the gaming industry as a whole. They wanted to shine a light on the fact that the people making games, the ones who had once seen their work as a form of artistic expression, were now being forced to operate under oppressive financial constraints. One of their first moves was to partner with academic institutions and nonprofit organizations to conduct a large-scale survey on the long-term effects of gaming addiction, financial distress caused by microtransactions, and the broader psychological impacts of loot box systems. This time, their goal wasn't just to expose the problem, it was to create a dialogue about how to fix it. They planned to propose alternative models for monetization that didn't rely on exploiting players' weaknesses, models that were sustainable and ethical, without sacrificing creativity or quality. But this new partnership wasn't without its risks. They both knew that this move would make them powerful enemies within the industry. Some of the biggest players in gaming were already preparing their next round of attacks, and they weren't going to take kindly to Musk and Riley disrupting the status quo. Riley, in particular, knew that speaking out against the industry's most profitable practices could cost her everything. Many of her former colleagues still worked in the industry, and speaking out against it could mean losing all her connections. But Riley was unflinching. "We can't keep pretending that everything is fine," she said. "We have a responsibility to the players. We have a responsibility to the developers who are being silenced by the pressure to make money. If we don't do something now, it's going to get worse." Musk agreed. He had been through battles before, and this one was no different. It was going to take everything they had, and more, but he knew they were on the right side of history. Their next steps were clear: they would continue their campaign, this time with an even stronger, more unified front. The battle for the soul of gaming was heating up, and this time, Musk had a powerful ally by his side. With Elon Musk and Samantha Riley now working side by side, the battle to reform the gaming industry entered a new phase. They weren't just two isolated figures challenging the status quo anymore, they were building something much bigger, a movement that could change the entire structure of the gaming world. The idea was simple yet radical: create a coalition of like-minded developers, players, psychologists, and advocates to support ethical gaming practices and call for an end to exploitative business models. The first step was to expand their network. Musk and Riley traveled to several major tech conferences, where they sought out developers and industry insiders who were also disillusioned with the direction gaming had taken. It wasn't long before they found a few key allies: John Markoff, a former executive at a major gaming studio who had quit in protest over the increasingly aggressive monetization tactics, and Claire Foster, a behavioral psychologist who had spent years researching the psychological effects of gaming addiction. Markoff and Foster were both cautious about getting involved. They had seen the power of the industry and knew that challenging it was a dangerous move. But after hearing Musk and Riley's vision for a more ethical future in gaming, they decided to join forces. "I've seen firsthand the damage this industry has done," Markoff said during one of their initial meetings. "We're creating products designed to manipulate people into spending money. That's not what games should be about." Foster added, "The research is clear. The long-term effects of these systems aren't just financial, they're emotional and psychological. We're breeding a generation of people who struggle to control their impulses, who prioritize in-game rewards over real-life relationships. It's time for us to take a stand." The coalition, now with a diverse group of experts and advocates, began developing its strategy. They started by drafting a comprehensive manifesto, one that would articulate their core principles, challenges, and proposed solutions for the gaming industry. The manifesto outlined the harm caused by predatory business practices, like microtransactions, loot boxes, and time-limited content. It also included a call for developers to return to the core values of gaming: creativity, innovation, and player experience over profit. The manifesto was to be the foundation of their public campaign. But before launching it, they decided to take a more subtle approach, testing the waters and gauging public opinion on a larger scale. They wanted to create a dialogue that would challenge the very assumptions players and developers had about gaming. The first step in this quieter campaign was to launch a series of surveys aimed at players, asking them about their experiences with modern gaming practices. What percentage of players had spent real money on in-game purchases? How often did they feel pressured to make these purchases? How many had experienced a sense of addiction or compulsion? The surveys also asked about their general feelings toward the current state of the industry. Were they happy with the direction gaming was heading? The results were staggering. Nearly 70% of players admitted to spending money on in-game purchases, with a significant percentage saying they felt compelled to do so due to the game's design. Another 55% of respondents revealed that they had experienced negative emotional effects, like frustration or anxiety, because of these in-game mechanics. The survey also found that a growing number of players believed the quality of games had deteriorated in recent years, with many attributing the decline to the dominance of monetization over creative gameplay. Musk and Riley knew they had to take these findings and use them as ammunition in their upcoming battle. The data wasn't just numbers. It was a reflection of the reality players were living in every day. They were being manipulated, and the industry needed to be held accountable. Armed with the results of the surveys, the coalition began to reach out to major media outlets, influencers, and content creators to spread the message. The goal was to bring the issue into the public conversation and make it impossible for the gaming giants to ignore. They reached out to prominent YouTubers, streamers, and social media figures who had large followings and who had previously voiced their concerns about the negative aspects of gaming. It was a slow burn, but soon the message was beginning to spread. The coalition's first major public event was a live stream, titled Gaming for the Future. It was a massive undertaking, with Musk, Riley, Markoff, Foster, and several other members of the coalition taking part in discussions about the future of gaming. They invited industry veterans, psychologists, and gamers to share their insights, providing a platform for people who had never had a voice in the ongoing conversation. The live stream quickly went viral. Thousands of gamers tuned in to hear what Musk and his allies had to say. It wasn't just the content that made the live stream so successful, it was the message. The world was finally hearing the truth about what gaming had become, and people were hungry for change. The event featured poignant moments, including Riley sharing her experience as a former developer who had witnessed firsthand the shift from passion-driven development to profit-driven mechanics. She spoke about the difficult decision to leave Arcadia Studios and how, after years of contributing to an industry she loved, she could no longer be part of a system that prioritized financial gain over player satisfaction. "This is a moment of truth," Riley said during her segment. We've reached a crossroads, and the choices we make now will define the future of gaming. We can either continue down this path, where every decision is made to squeeze more money out of players, or we can return to the heart of what made gaming great in the first place. The emotional weight of Riley's words, coupled with the hard-hitting statistics from the Coalition's survey, made an undeniable impact. Social media exploded with reactions from gamers, many of whom expressed relief that they weren't the only ones feeling disillusioned with the state of the industry. The conversation shifted. What had started as a debate about addiction and manipulation became a larger discussion about the very ethics of gaming, about whether the industry had lost its soul. But of course, the pushback from the gaming giants was swift. Ether Games, led by Thomas Reeve, fired back with a statement denouncing the livestream as sensationalist, and accusing Musk and the Coalition of trying to dismantle the gaming industry. Reeve doubled down on the narrative that gaming was an art form that needed financial backing to thrive. He dismissed the findings of the surveys, calling them selective and anecdotal. But the tide was beginning to turn. The Coalition had successfully planted the seeds of doubt in the minds of the public. More and more gamers began questioning the industry's motives, and as the Coalition's message gained momentum, the industry's defenses started to crack. Musk knew the battle was far from over, but he also knew they were winning the war for hearts and minds. The movement had officially begun. The gaming world was about to change, and he was at the forefront of that transformation. The momentum Musk and Riley had generated with their campaign was undeniable. The Gaming for the Future live stream had lit a fire under the gaming community, and their coalition was growing stronger with each passing day. More developers, psychologists, players, and industry insiders were joining their cause, eager to stand up against the industry's predatory practices. However, as expected, the gaming giants were not going to let their lucrative business models be dismantled without a fight. It didn't take long for the backlash to come. The first major strike came from Thomas Reeve and Ether Games, who, enraged by the Coalition's success, launched a counter-campaign to discredit Musk, Riley, and the movement they were building. In a series of scathing press releases, Ether Games accused the Coalition of spreading misinformation and undermining the hard work of developers who were just trying to survive in an increasingly competitive market. "We are at the forefront of innovation," Reeve stated in one of his interviews. "These so-called activists want to return gaming to a bygone era of unprofitable creativity. They are blind to the realities of the modern industry. Games are expensive to develop. They require large teams, cutting-edge technology, and significant investments. Microtransactions and in-game purchases are a necessary part of the equation." While Reeve's arguments may have sounded convincing to some, they were quickly undermined by the Coalition's data and Riley's personal testimony. She had seen firsthand the shift from creating games to generating profits. She wasn't just an outsider criticizing the industry, she had been a part of it, helping build some of the very systems that were now being used to manipulate players. Still, the power of Ether Games and the other major studios was immense. They had resources, influence, and loyal supporters who believed in their vision of the future of gaming. Musk knew that the fight ahead would be grueling. One of the most damaging tactics Ether Games employed was attacking the very foundation of the Coalition's arguments. They started questioning the validity of the surveys Musk and Riley had conducted, calling them skewed and biased. They even went so far as to hire independent firms to conduct their own surveys, which they claimed showed that the majority of players were satisfied with the current state of microtransactions in games. But despite the heavy pushback, Musk and Riley weren't deterred. They knew they needed to get their message out to a wider audience and that the industry's attempts to suppress them could actually be used as fuel for their fire. The next phase of the campaign would need to be more aggressive, more visible, and more persuasive. The Coalition began planning a high-profile press conference. It would be a pivotal moment in the battle, a chance to speak directly to the media and the public about what was really happening in the gaming world. The press conference was scheduled to take place in New York City, and Musk was determined to make it a defining moment in the movement's history. The night before the press conference, Musk sat in his hotel room, going over his notes. The pressure was mounting, but he was focused. He knew what he had to do. He had to use this moment to shift the conversation away from the industry's smear tactics and towards the real issues: player well-being, the long-term effects of addiction, and the importance of returning to gaming as an art form. It was time for him to stop playing defense and go on the offensive. The following day, Musk and Riley stood before a room full of journalists, camera crews, and tech influencers. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The press had been eagerly waiting to hear what Musk would say after weeks of controversy. Would he fold under pressure, or would he continue to double down on his criticism of the industry? Musk stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but resolute. "Thank you all for being here. I know the past few weeks have been filled with a lot of noise and distraction. But I want to be clear, the conversation we're having today isn't about me or the coalition. It's about the future of gaming. It's about the future of the players who support this industry, and it's about the developers who want to create something meaningful." He paused, letting the words sink in. The truth is, gaming has lost its way. It has become an industry that prioritizes profits over people. It exploits the very players it claims to serve, using manipulative tactics to make money off of their addiction. The data is clear: players are being hurt, and it's time for us to take action. As Musk spoke, Riley stood quietly beside him, nodding in agreement. She had already shared her testimony about the effects of microtransactions and the toxic environment in which developers were now forced to work. The press conference was as much about revealing the human cost of these business practices as it was about shining a light on the bigger picture, the future of gaming itself. Musk continued, "We've seen the industry's attempt to discredit us, but here's the truth: we're not the enemy. We're fighting for a better future, one where games can be fun, rewarding, and above all, fair. It's time for us to demand more from the industry. It's time for developers to put their creativity first, to focus on making games that players love, not just games that players are forced to spend money on." The press conference was a turning point. While some reporters remained skeptical, the majority of the media outlets began to pick up the story. Social media exploded with support for Musk and Riley, as gamers shared their own stories of frustration with the industry. The tide was slowly but surely turning. Reeve and the other executives from Ether Games continued their attacks, but their words were starting to fall on deaf ears. The more they fought back, the more it became clear to the public that they were trying to protect a broken system, one that was built on the exploitation of players. Still, Musk and Riley knew that the battle was far from over. The gaming industry was massive, and there were many more fights to come. But they were no longer fighting alone. They had the support of an entire movement, and with each new ally they gained, the industry's grip on the gaming world weakened. In the end, Musk and Riley knew one thing for sure: they were in this for the long haul. And they were ready to take on whatever came next. The press conference had been a success, and for the first time in weeks, Elon Musk felt a sense of optimism. The public was beginning to listen. The media was on their side. The gaming community, largely skeptical at first, was now seeing that their concerns had a voice. Yet, as Musk and Riley watched the tide turn in their favor, they knew that this was only the beginning of the battle. The real work was just beginning. After the press conference, the coalition's message spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with heated debates, with gamers from all over the world discussing the need for a change. The hashtag gaming for the future trended globally for days, signaling that the movement had gained traction in ways Musk hadn't anticipated. But with success came resistance, more than they had expected. Ether Games, desperate to protect its model, didn't simply fade into the background. Instead, they ramped up their campaign against Musk and the coalition. They launched a series of targeted advertisements, attempting to frame Musk as an outsider who didn't understand the industry he was attacking. In these ads, they showed footage of classic games from the past, juxtaposing them with images of modern games that showcased the innovative, high-tech graphics and engaging experiences that microtransactions supposedly supported. "We're creating the future of entertainment," one of the ads proclaimed, showing a stunning, hyper-realistic game world. "It's time to evolve." Stop the misinformation. Join us in the revolution of gaming. But the ad campaign was more than just about showcasing the future of gaming, it was also about vilifying Musk and Riley. It was a direct attack on their credibility, positioning them as out-of-touch idealists who couldn't comprehend the complexities of the industry. In one particularly cutting ad, Reeve himself appeared on screen, confidently stating, "Elon Musk may be a genius in space exploration, but when it comes to video games, he's just a dreamer who doesn't understand what it takes to make games profitable." As Musk and Riley watched the ads, it became clear that the industry was going to play dirty. They weren't just fighting for ethical gaming, they were fighting for their very reputations and the future of the coalition itself. Still, despite the fierce opposition, the coalition wasn't backing down. They knew they needed more than just public support, they needed allies who could help them counter the powerful gaming corporations. They needed developers who had seen the damage done by the industry's practices and were willing to risk everything for the greater good. The next major step was to secure the backing of independent game developers. These smaller studios had been struggling under the weight of big corporate interests, and many had been forced to implement microtransactions just to stay afloat. It was no secret that the big studios, Ether Games chief among them, had used their financial might to push indie developers out of the market, forcing them to adopt the same exploitative business practices. In a bold move, Musk and Riley invited several indie developers to a private meeting. The goal was simple. They wanted to unite under a common banner, to create a coalition of developers who would refuse to include microtransactions in their games. They would make games based on passion, creativity, and player experience, not the desire to generate endless profit. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe in San Francisco, away from the prying eyes of the press. Riley and Musk arrived early, their excitement palpable. The two of them had spent weeks reaching out to indie developers, explaining their vision, and trying to get them on board. When the first few developers arrived, there was palpable tension in the room. They were cautious, understandably. They knew the stakes. To join the coalition was to risk the security and success they had worked so hard to achieve. They were going up against an industry juggernaut that had almost every major studio in its pocket. But as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that they were all on the same page. "We want to create something meaningful, not just profitable," said Maya Larkin, the lead designer at an indie studio called Pixelcraft Games. "But we've all been forced to compromise. It's hard to stay true to our creative vision when we're told that if we don't include loot boxes or microtransactions, our game won't make it. I've seen studios close their doors because they couldn't afford the latest trend," said Marcus Fields, a game director at High Tower Games, an indie studio known for its puzzle games. "The moment you deviate from what's popular, they come at you like a wave. They flood the market with their big-budget games that include these monetization tactics, and you can't compete." Musk leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "That's exactly why we need to come together now. If we don't, we're going to lose what makes gaming special. The industry will be dominated by the same corporate interests, and the heart of what we love will be gone. But if we stand together, if we put player experience first, we can set a new standard." By the end of the meeting, the group had agreed to a bold plan, a unified stand against monetization in games. They would create a collective of indie studios, calling it the Game Makers Alliance, that would pledge to never include microtransactions or loot boxes in their games. The alliance would focus on producing high-quality, creative games that players could enjoy without feeling the pressure to spend money at every turn. Riley was overwhelmed with a sense of purpose. She had seen firsthand the destructive power of big corporations, but now she was witnessing something new, a solidarity among developers who were ready to fight for their vision. "Together, we can create a movement that will show the world that games are more than just a commodity," Riley said. "They're art. And we can prove that games can thrive without exploitation." As Musk and Riley left the meeting, they felt a renewed sense of optimism. The power of the coalition wasn't just in their message, it was in the unity of their supporters. The battle had entered a new phase. They weren't just fighting against a system anymore, they were building an entirely new one. But the gaming giants weren't about to give up easily. Reeve, enraged by the growing movement, announced that Ether Games would host a massive press event to debunk the myths surrounding microtransactions and in-game purchases. It was clear that the fight was about to become even more intense. Musk smiled wryly as he read the announcement. The industry had underestimated him, and now, the gloves were off. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following the announcement of the Game Makers Alliance were a whirlwind of activity. Musk and Riley could feel the weight of the movement on their shoulders. This wasn't just about changing the way video games were made, it was about reshaping an entire industry. Their success depended on the alliances they had forged and the loyalty of developers who had grown tired of playing by the big corporations' rules. But they knew the road ahead would be paved with obstacles, and the most significant one was yet to come. As expected, Ether Games wasted no time in striking back. Thomas Reeve, in a carefully orchestrated move, invited media outlets from across the globe to a press event where they would debunk the myths surrounding microtransactions. Reeve, with his polished public persona, had a reputation for being charismatic and persuasive. Musk and Riley knew that he would do everything in his power to discredit the growing movement and turn public opinion back in favor of the traditional gaming model. The stage was set for a major confrontation. The press event was held at Ether Games' sprawling headquarters in Silicon Valley, a sleek building designed to evoke a sense of cutting-edge innovation. Journalists from the biggest tech and gaming outlets filled the room, eager to hear Reeve's rebuttal. The company had made it clear that this wasn't just another corporate announcement, it was a full-on counteroffensive. Reeve appeared on stage, his signature confidence shining through as the crowd cheered. His suit was impeccable, his hair neatly combed, and his smile both reassuring and disarming. He had spent years crafting this image of a visionary, a man who understood the future of gaming better than anyone. And today, he would use that image to dismantle the arguments that Musk and Riley had put forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Reeve began, his voice booming through the auditorium. I know many of you have heard the recent claims that microtransactions are ruining gaming. But I'm here today to tell you that's simply not true. Microtransactions are part of the future. They are what make games better, more dynamic, and more accessible. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Without microtransactions, many of your favorite games would not even exist. It's how developers fund ongoing content, how they create immersive worlds that evolve over time. The idea that we should go back to a pay once and play model is a fantasy. The gaming industry has changed, and we need to evolve with it. Reeve's words were powerful, and for a moment, it seemed like the audience was on his side. He had a knack for making complex issues seem simple, convincing people that the system was working just fine. He even showed a series of charts and graphs that appeared to back up his claims. According to these charts, microtransactions and in-game purchases had generated billions of dollars, which allowed developers to create bigger, better games. But Musk and Riley had anticipated this move. In fact, they had already started preparing their own response. The day after Reeve's press event, Riley and Musk released a joint statement to the media, backed by detailed research, interviews, and hard evidence of the negative effects of microtransactions. They focused on the data showing how these practices were harming players, not just financially, but psychologically. They highlighted the increasing number of studies showing how loot boxes were a gateway to gambling addiction, particularly among younger players. They also provided testimony from former game developers who had worked for companies like Ether Games, detailing how the pressure to include in-game purchases had corrupted their creative process. Riley, who had once worked within the corporate structure, knew the manipulative tactics all too well. What's happening now isn't about making games better, she explained in an interview. It's about making money off players, using psychology to manipulate them into spending more. It's not fair. It's not ethical. And it's time we acknowledge the harm it's causing. Musk, too, spoke out, his voice firm and unwavering. Reeve and his colleagues at Ether Games are trying to convince you that this system is sustainable. But it's not. We're seeing the mental and emotional toll it's taking on the players. We're seeing parents getting frustrated because their children are addicted to virtual items that don't even exist. This isn't innovation, it's exploitation. The press took notice. For the first time, Reeves' glossy presentations were being scrutinized. The public was beginning to realize that there was more to the conversation than Ether Games was letting on. And as Musk and Riley spoke more passionately about the human cost of microtransactions, it became clear that the industry's house of cards was starting to wobble. Despite the growing support for their movement, the fight was far from over. Musk knew that in order to bring about real change, they would have to take the battle directly to the consumers. They needed to create a groundswell of support from the gaming community itself, something that would be impossible for even the biggest corporations to ignore. To do this, the coalition launched a series of grassroots campaigns, targeting players directly. They started by hosting massive online events, including a gaming marathon where streamers would play popular games without any in-game purchases. It was an opportunity for fans to see firsthand what a game could be like without the constant pressure to spend money. Riley and Musk participated in these events, speaking with players, sharing their vision, and demonstrating that it was possible to create games that were both fun and profitable, without the need for microtransactions. The gaming community's response was overwhelming. For the first time in years, players felt like they had a voice. They shared their stories of frustration, and in some cases, their addiction to in-game purchases. The hashtag #StopTheLootBoxes trended across social media, with gamers from all corners of the world joining the fight. But as the movement gained momentum, Ether Games fought back even harder. Reeves took to social media, calling the coalition's message a dangerous narrative that could set the industry back decades. The stakes were higher than ever, and Musk knew that this would be the defining moment in their campaign. The next move had to be decisive. The tide of battle had shifted. The gaming community was buzzing with excitement as the voices of players, developers, and industry insiders joined together under one banner. Musk and Riley's coalition had made incredible strides, but the path ahead remained treacherous. The corporate giants, led by Ether Games, were pulling out all the stops to maintain control of the industry, and the stakes had never been higher. Musk sat in his office late one night, staring out at the sprawling city lights of Los Angeles. Riley had just left after a tense meeting with their allies, and now it was his turn to confront the true weight of their struggle. He knew the coalition was gaining ground, but what Reeves and Ether Games represented was no small force. The immense power of big corporations, their ability to manipulate the narrative, and the sheer scale of their marketing budget were weapons that would not go down easily. Yet Musk had a plan. If they were going to win this war, they had to strike at the heart of the system. "We need something big," Musk had said earlier in the meeting. "Something that will put the issue front and center for everyone. Something that will change the conversation completely." "What are you thinking?" Riley had asked. Musk had smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We go after the heart of their business model. We'll expose the full extent of the exploitation they're engaging in. And we'll do it in a way that they can't ignore." The next morning, the announcement came. Elon Musk had partnered with several major consumer advocacy organizations to launch a massive investigative project into the true cost of microtransactions and loot boxes. The project would include a detailed exposé, with interviews from former employees of Ether Games and other major gaming companies, along with hard data that highlighted how the industry was manipulating players, especially vulnerable young ones, through gambling-like mechanics in their games. But this wasn't just a typical exposé. Musk's team had secured video footage of gaming executives discussing their strategies for pushing players into spending money on in-game purchases. They had access to private meetings where the industry's top decision-makers openly discussed how they used psychological tactics to maximize player spending. It was a treasure trove of damning material, one that would challenge the very foundation of the industry. As soon as the press release hit, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Ether Games scrambled to distance itself from the accusations, but the damage was already done. Journalists began to dig deeper, citing the evidence provided by Musk's team. The story was everywhere. Reeve tried to save face, claiming that the leaked footage was taken out of context, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. But the story didn't end there. Musk and Riley knew they had to keep the momentum going. The exposé was a powerful tool, but they needed more than just a news cycle. They needed the public to see the stark reality of what had been happening behind the scenes. They needed to create a movement that would ripple through the entire industry and force the change they were fighting for. They announced a series of live-streamed debates, where Musk, Riley, and key coalition members would go head-to-head with executives from Ether Games and other major studios. The debates would focus on the ethics of microtransactions, the psychological impact of loot boxes, and whether the future of gaming should prioritize profits over player well-being. The first debate was set to take place in just a few days, and the anticipation was palpable. People from all over the world tuned in to watch. For the first time in years, the gaming industry's darkest secrets were being laid bare for the public to see. The stakes had never been higher. As the date of the first debate approached, the pressure mounted. Riley could feel it in the air. This was their chance to deliver the knockout blow, to expose the truth in a way that could no longer be ignored. But she also knew that the opposition wasn't going to back down. Reeve, ever the master of media manipulation, was already preparing for the showdown. Musk and Riley spent countless hours rehearsing for the debates, crafting their arguments with precision and passion. They needed to remain calm and composed, even as the opposition tried to twist their words and manipulate the narrative. They weren't just representing themselves anymore, they were fighting for the future of gaming. When the day of the first debate arrived, the tension in the air was electric. The debate hall was packed, with media outlets from around the world broadcasting the event live. The stage was set, on one side, Musk, Riley, and their allies, on the other, Reeve and his corporate team from Ether Games. The debate would be moderated by a respected journalist known for his impartiality, but everyone knew this wasn't going to be a calm discussion. This was going to be a war of words. The debate began, and immediately it was clear that both sides were fully prepared. Reeve was his usual charismatic self, delivering his arguments with confidence and a sense of entitlement. He painted microtransactions as a necessary evil, claiming that without them, the gaming industry would collapse under the weight of its own ambition. You can't have progress without financial sustainability, Reeve argued. The industry is growing at an exponential rate. If we want to continue creating the kind of games that players love, we need to keep the lights on. Microtransactions and loot boxes are the means by which we ensure that future innovation is possible. Musk and Riley, however, weren't buying it. They had the evidence, the statistics, and the human stories to counter Reeve's polished rhetoric. Riley stood up, her voice clear and steady as she made her case. It's not about sustainability, Mr. Reeve, Riley said, her tone firm. It's about exploitation. You're not giving players a choice, you're manipulating them into spending money they don't have, pushing them into gambling-like behavior for the sake of profit. This isn't about making better games. This is about controlling players. Musk took the floor next, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Reeve's fiery rhetoric. And let's talk about the so-called choice that you're giving players. The choice to spend money on something they didn't ask for, something that makes the game harder or less enjoyable unless they pay. That's not choice, that's coercion. The room was electric. The debate wasn't just about the future of gaming, it was about values, ethics, and the kind of industry the players wanted to support. It was a battle between innovation fueled by creativity and innovation fueled by profit. And the audience was listening. As the debate concluded, it was clear that the momentum was on Musk and Riley's side. The audience had been swayed by the evidence and the passion of their arguments. Reeve tried to recover with his usual charm, but the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. For the first time in years, the public was starting to question the core structure of the gaming industry. The war was far from over, but a crucial battle had been won. And now, there was no turning back. The days following the first debate were a blur of media attention, social media campaigns, and heated discussions across the gaming community. The debate had sparked something far larger than anyone had expected. It wasn't just the exposed footage or the damning evidence that struck a chord with the public, it was the raw, unfiltered honesty that Musk and Riley had shown. For the first time in years, the veil was lifted from the industry, and players everywhere could see the machinery behind the games they loved. Reeve, ever the strategist, quickly attempted to regain control of the narrative. Ether Games released a polished response, claiming that the debate had been a misunderstanding, that microtransactions were necessary to fund future development, and that Ether Games had been pioneers in supporting indie developers through these systems. But no matter how well crafted the response, the damage had been done. The cracks in the corporate facade were visible, and the public wasn't buying it anymore. For Musk and Riley, the victory was bittersweet. They had exposed the truth, but they knew the road ahead would only get more dangerous. Ether Games wasn't going to roll over quietly, they had too much power, too much money at stake. They would fight back with everything they had. The next few days were filled with non-stop planning. Riley had been working tirelessly with the coalition to build support, while Musk, ever the visionary, was focused on what came next. He knew they had to strike while the iron was hot. "What do you think the next step is?" Riley asked, looking up from the table covered in notes, statistics, and player feedback. "We need to do what no one else has dared to do," Musk replied, his voice low but filled with conviction. "We need to give players the power to take control of their own gaming experiences. We need to create something so compelling, so revolutionary, that Ether Games won't be able to ignore it. It's time to build a game that doesn't need microtransactions to survive, a game that players will rally behind." Riley raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "You mean build a whole new game?" Musk nodded. "Yes. A game where players don't have to pay to win. Where their time and skill are the only things that matter. A game that proves what we've been saying all along, that it's possible to create a game that's profitable without exploiting the players." It was a bold vision, but Musk's enthusiasm was contagious. Over the next week, Riley and Musk worked closely with top developers who had joined their cause, independent creators who shared their belief that the future of gaming could be something far better than what Ether Games had to offer. Meanwhile, the public sentiment continued to shift. Social media was buzzing with discussions about the future of gaming. The hashtag #StopTheLootBoxes was trending worldwide, and it wasn't just players who were speaking out. Even some major gaming influencers and YouTubers, who had previously been hesitant to criticize the industry for fear of alienating their audiences, were now getting on board. They released videos and blog posts supporting the coalition, encouraging their fans to take a stand. In one viral tweet, a well-known gamer posted, "For the first time in years, I'm excited about the future of gaming. This isn't about being anti-microtransaction, it's about being pro-player. #StopTheLootBoxes." The movement was gaining momentum. And as the world watched, Musk and Riley unveiled their next big step, a Kickstarter campaign to fund their new game, Project Rebirth. The announcement was met with an overwhelming response. Thousands of players pledged their support, eager to put their money where their mouth was. It was clear that Project Rebirth wasn't just another indie game, it was a symbol of resistance against a system that had prioritized profits over player experience. But as the campaign soared to record-breaking heights, Ether Games made its next move. Reeve appeared on a live broadcast, flanked by his top executives, to deliver a scathing rebuttal to the growing movement. He accused Musk and Riley of attempting to destroy the industry, and claimed that their game, Project Rebirth, was nothing more than a PR stunt designed to prey on vulnerable players who didn't understand how the gaming economy worked. "We're not against players," Reeve said with his usual charm, "we're not against innovation. But the fact is, microtransactions are a fundamental part of how games evolve today. Musk and Riley want to take us back to a time when games were static, when developers were limited by their budgets and resources. That's not the future. That's the past." But the more Reeve spoke, the more the public began to see the cracks in his arguments. The notion that microtransactions were evolutionary was beginning to lose its appeal. Players weren't fooled by the smooth-talking CEO. They wanted a game that respected their time and money, not one that sought to manipulate them into paying more for a better experience. As Ether Games dug in its heels, Musk and Riley doubled down on their mission. The world was watching, and they were ready to make history. Then, a game-changing moment arrived. A major gaming convention in Las Vegas was about to take place, and it would be the perfect stage for the next phase of the battle. Musk and Riley secured a booth at the event, where they would showcase an early prototype of Project Rebirth to the public. It was a risky move. If the game failed to impress, it could deal a devastating blow to their cause. But they had faith in their vision, and the pressure was on to deliver. The convention floor was filled with excitement as players, developers, and journalists roamed the bustling aisles. When Musk and Riley's booth finally opened, a crowd quickly gathered. Project Rebirth was on display, and the demo offered a unique experience: no microtransactions, no pay-to-win mechanics, just pure gameplay. Riley greeted the players, explaining the premise of the game and its dedication to offering a fair experience for all. As players sat down to try the game, it was clear that they were blown away by the quality of the gameplay, the world building, and the excitement that came with simply playing, without the nagging feeling that they had to spend money to progress. One by one, players left the demo with wide smiles, praising the game for its engaging mechanics and the sense of satisfaction that came with earning rewards through skill and dedication, not purchases. As the day wore on, the buzz around Project Rebirth only grew louder. Players shared their experiences on social media, posting videos and photos, declaring their support for a future where players' skills, not their wallets, determined their success. The media caught wind of the excitement, and soon, Project Rebirth was trending everywhere. Reeve, watching from a distance, knew that things had just gotten much more complicated for Ether Games. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was a revolution. And Musk and Riley were leading the charge. The gaming world had been set ablaze. Project Rebirth wasn't just a game anymore, it was a symbol of resistance against the prevailing corporate model. The overwhelming support from the public, coupled with the stunning reception at the gaming convention, had shifted the tides dramatically. What Musk and Riley had done was more than just make a statement, it had struck at the heart of the industry's deepest vulnerabilities. As the days passed, the response from Ether Games became increasingly hostile. Reeve was relentless. A few days after the convention, he gave an impassioned speech at a rival event, claiming that Musk and Riley's campaign was a dangerous distraction to the future of gaming. He painted their resistance as naive, claiming that the gaming industry needed its revenue streams to evolve and continue pushing boundaries. "We are here to innovate," he said with conviction. "What Musk and Riley are offering is regression. It's a step back to the past, a past where developers were limited by their budgets and players had fewer choices." But Musk wasn't fazed. His team, though small in number compared to the might of Ether Games, was growing in strength and solidarity. Developers, artists, and gamers from all corners of the world had joined the cause. Even players who had once supported microtransactions were beginning to question whether they were getting their money's worth. Project Rebirth was quickly becoming the game that players didn't know they needed. But the pressure was mounting. Musk knew the stakes were higher than ever. As the media continued to cover the war between Musk's coalition and Ether Games, Riley sat at her desk, scrolling through hundreds of messages of support. Each message, each comment was a reminder of what they were fighting for. But it wasn't just the positive feedback that caught her attention. It was the emails from industry insiders, some anonymous, spilling secrets about the dark side of the business that Ether Games and others didn't want exposed. One message stood out. "Meet me at the usual place. I have something you need to see." Riley's heart skipped a beat. She had seen that phrase before. It was from a former Ether Games developer who had been part of their internal team, someone who had worked on the microtransaction systems. The thought of what this anonymous source might reveal filled her with both excitement and apprehension. Later that night, she met the informant in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The figure sitting across from her looked nervous, constantly scanning the room to make sure they weren't being watched. Riley didn't press for their name, she had learned to respect their need for anonymity. "I have something you need to see," the informant said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "It's all there. You can't ignore it now." Riley nodded, tucking the drive into her bag. "Thank you," she said softly, knowing how dangerous it had been for the informant to come forward. As she left the cafe, Riley felt a sense of unease settle in her chest. This was it, the smoking gun. If what the informant had provided was as damning as it seemed, Ether Games would have no choice but to address the scandal head-on. But that would only escalate the battle. Musk had been right all along, it was going to be an uphill fight from here on out. The following week, Riley and Musk met at their usual strategy session. Riley brought the flash drive with her, placing it on the table between them. Musk immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They had suspected that there was more to Ether Games than anyone had known, but this could be a game-changer. With a sense of quiet anticipation, Riley plugged the flash drive into Musk's laptop. The files were numerous, dozens of internal memos, emails, and meeting transcripts. As they sifted through the documents, a clear pattern began to emerge. Ether Games wasn't just using microtransactions to sustain their business, they were actively designing their games to encourage compulsive spending. They had crafted elaborate systems within their games that made it nearly impossible for players to progress without paying. One email stood out above the rest. It was from a high-ranking executive at Ether Games to Reeve. The subject line read, "Project, Addiction, Monetization Strategy for Next Gen." Musk's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "This is it," he murmured. "This is what we've been looking for. They're targeting vulnerable players, using psychological tactics to get them hooked on spending." The email detailed the design of specific paywalls built into games. Ether Games had been experimenting with game mechanics that would increase difficulty at certain stages, prompting players to either wait hours to progress or pay for in-game items to continue. The documents also described how they used randomized loot boxes to exploit players' natural desire for reward, creating a cycle of addiction. The language used in the emails wasn't about creating fun, it was about creating the perfect system for continuous spending. "This is more than unethical," Riley said, her voice shaking with anger. "This is exploitation. This is what we've been fighting against all along." Musk didn't respond immediately. He knew this was the key to taking down Ether Games. This was proof of the deliberate manipulation that had been occurring behind the scenes. If they released this information, it would be impossible for Reeve and his company to deny it. But Musk also knew that exposing this kind of data would make them a target, and Ether Games wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. The decision to go public with this information wasn't one to take lightly. They would need to be careful, strategic. They needed to make sure the evidence was irrefutable and that the message reached the right people. "We can't just release this," Musk said, his tone thoughtful. "We need a platform. We need a voice that will amplify this in a way that can't be ignored." Riley nodded, understanding where Musk was going. "A press conference. We make it public, and we bring the media, the gaming community, and the regulators into the conversation. We go after the heart of their business model." Musk smiled, the fire of determination lighting up his eyes. "Exactly. We'll take them down, piece by piece. But we need to be careful. The backlash will be intense." And so, they began to plan. The next few days were spent preparing for the press conference. Every detail had to be perfect, the presentation, the speakers, the timing. It wasn't just about exposing Ether Games, it was about starting a movement. A movement that would hold all game companies accountable for the ways they manipulated their players. It was about reshaping the future of gaming. As the press conference loomed closer, the tension was palpable. Riley and Musk knew they were on the precipice of something huge, something that could change the course of the industry forever. But they also knew the risks. Ether Games would fight back with everything they had. It was time to take the battle to the next level. The day had arrived. Musk and Riley stood backstage, eyes fixed on the screen ahead of them. Behind the curtain, the press conference setup was a chaotic flurry of activity, camera crews scrambling to position themselves, reporters huddling in small clusters, and the buzz of anticipation building with each passing second. Outside, the world was watching. It wasn't just the gaming press in attendance. This event had drawn interest from mainstream media, financial analysts, and even government regulators. The implications of what Musk and Riley were about to do were far-reaching. This wasn't just about exposing Ether Games anymore. It was about exposing an entire industry. Riley couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, the battle they had started months ago when they first began questioning the ethics of microtransactions. And now, here they were, ready to change the face of gaming forever. Musk, ever the composed visionary, was calm as ever, his expression unwavering. He had been through high-stakes moments before, launching rockets, leading billion-dollar companies, but today felt different. Today, it was personal. His face reflected both the determination and the risks that came with this fight. As the event began, a hush fell over the room. The crowd silenced as Riley and Musk made their way to the stage, stepping into the spotlight. "Thank you all for joining us," Riley began, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable sense of purpose. "What we're about to show you is something that will change the future of gaming. But more than that, it's something that will change the relationship between players and the games they love." Musk stepped forward, his voice smooth but with an intensity that immediately grabbed the room's attention. "What we've discovered over the past few months is something that we can no longer ignore. It's something that affects millions of people, players, families, and communities all over the world. Today, we're here to expose the truth." Riley nodded. "And that truth is this: Ether Games, and many other companies in the industry, have been exploiting players for years. They've used psychological manipulation to keep players trapped in a cycle of compulsive spending. It's not just a business model. It's a system built on addiction." The audience murmured, the weight of the accusation beginning to settle in. The media representatives leaned forward, their attention fixed on the stage. Riley motioned for the screen behind them to turn on. As it flickered to life, a series of documents appeared, each one more damning than the last. The first document displayed was the email Musk and Riley had uncovered, the one that read, "Project, Addiction, Monetization Strategy for Next Gen." The email was shown in full, with the most incriminating sections highlighted. Musk walked the audience through the details, how Ether Games had designed in-game systems to deliberately frustrate players, leading them to purchase items or wait for hours just to continue progressing. "This isn't an isolated case," Musk said, his voice low and deliberate. "This is a calculated, multi-billion-dollar industry-wide strategy that's been implemented across some of the biggest titles in gaming today." Riley took over. "But it doesn't end there. We've also found extensive data showing how these tactics disproportionately affect vulnerable players, children, teenagers, and those who are simply looking for a fun experience. These microtransactions aren't just small purchases, they're the gateway to an addictive cycle. And Ether Games knew exactly what they were doing." The screen shifted to show a chart of data, spending habits, the frequency of loot box purchases, and even psychological studies that demonstrated how these systems were specifically designed to exploit human behavior. The charts made it clear, this was no accident. This was deliberate. The room was silent. The reporters furiously took notes, and you could almost hear the collective gasp as the full scope of the manipulation sank in. But then, as Musk and Riley continued, Reeves' voice came over the loudspeakers. "Enough." The doors to the press room burst open, and Ether Games CEO stormed onto the stage, flanked by two of his top executives. The audience, caught off guard, buzzed with confusion. Reeve was livid, his face flushed with anger. "This is a blatant attack on my company, on my employees, and on an entire industry," he shouted, turning to the crowd. "What Musk and Riley are showing you is a gross misrepresentation of reality. They're trying to destroy everything we've built. They want to go back to a time where games were limited by budgets, not innovation. Reeve pointed toward the screen, his fingers shaking with frustration. We did what we had to do to push the industry forward. Microtransactions aren't just a way to make money, they're a way to fund the next big step in gaming. You want better graphics? You want more content? You want the next level of immersion? This is how we get there. And you want to take that away? The room was split. Some in the audience reacted with disbelief, others with skepticism. But Musk and Riley stood their ground, unwavering. You're wrong, Reeve, Riley said, her voice strong. What you've built is a system that preys on people's weaknesses. You've manipulated players, used addiction to line your pockets, and now you're trying to gaslight everyone into believing it's for the greater good. It's not. It's exploitation. And we're here to stop it. The back and forth between Reeve and Musk escalated, but it was clear that the tide had already shifted. The evidence was out in the open, and no amount of deflection could undo the damage that had been done. Riley and Musk had taken the high road, sticking to their message of transparency and player empowerment. Ether Games, despite its powerful presence, was now on the defensive. Then, the most unexpected thing happened. A series of journalists began to speak up. One by one, they began to share stories of their own experiences with the manipulation Musk and Riley had exposed. Several even admitted to falling victim to the tactics themselves. A game reviewer shared how he had spent hundreds of dollars on loot boxes for a game he thought was just a fun hobby. A parent tearfully recounted how their child's gaming addiction had racked up thousands in microtransactions without their knowledge. The press conference had turned into a revolution. Musk stepped forward again, his gaze steady. What we're doing here today isn't just about exposing Ether Games. It's about creating a future where players can enjoy games without fear of being taken advantage of. We're building a new kind of gaming, one that respects the player, where success is determined by skill, not the size of your wallet. And we will not stop until every player has that choice. The audience erupted in applause. The press conference had been a resounding success. The evidence was clear, the message was loud and unmistakable, and the momentum was firmly on Musk and Riley's side. But Reeve and Ether Games were far from finished. The battle was just beginning, and there was no telling where it would go next. As Musk and Riley left the stage, they exchanged a look of quiet determination. They had taken a giant leap forward, but the hardest part was still ahead. The dust had barely settled from the press conference when the first wave of retaliation from Ether Games hit. It wasn't just a public relations campaign, they were coming for Musk and Riley directly. Legal teams, angry emails, threats of lawsuits, all of it began flooding their inboxes within hours of the press conference. Reeve wasn't going to let this slide. He was a man who believed that the gaming industry, his industry, was built on a certain code, a code that allowed no room for rebels, no room for outsiders with grandiose ideas. He couldn't stand the idea that Musk and Riley had so successfully exposed the dark underbelly of his company's operation. So, the gloves were off. Within a day, Ether Games had initiated a multi-pronged legal battle. They filed defamation lawsuits, accusing Musk and Riley of spreading misinformation. The claim was that the evidence they had presented was taken out of context and had been manipulated to incite public outrage. The media picked up on the lawsuits quickly, and while some outlets sided with Musk and Riley, many others gave Reeve a platform to argue his case. It's an attempt to destroy an entire business model, Reeve said in a scathing interview. Musk and Riley don't understand that this is the future of gaming. What they're doing isn't revolutionizing gaming, they're trying to push us back to an outdated, archaic system. The truth is, their agenda is a threat to every company that's pushing the boundaries of what games can be. The stakes had just been raised. Musk and Riley knew that their only option was to stay the course and continue building their case, but they also knew that Ether Games had the resources and the media influence to make their lives miserable. If they were going to win this fight, they had to go beyond just exposing the truth. They had to mobilize, organize, and ensure that the public stood with them, not against them. Back at the Rebirth headquarters, the pressure was palpable. Riley paced in front of the monitors, scrolling through legal documents and media reports, her mind racing. She had seen this before, the way powerful corporations would use their influence to shut down the little guys. They could intimidate, smear, and destroy, but this time was different. Musk had a way of thinking bigger than anyone expected. "We need to keep the momentum going," Musk said, breaking the silence. He was calm, as always, but there was a sharp intensity in his eyes. "We can't let them silence us. But we also need to be smart." "What are you thinking?" Riley asked, stopping in her tracks to face him. Musk sat down at the table, pulling up a series of schematics for Project Rebirth. He started drawing out ideas on a whiteboard, mapping out their next steps. "If Ether Games wants to play dirty, we'll play smarter. We need to show the world that this isn't just about one company. This is about the entire gaming industry, and how players deserve to be treated fairly." Riley's mind was already running with possibilities. "You want to take this to the next level. Make it bigger." "Exactly," Musk replied. "We need to bring in the players. We need to show them that this is their fight, too." A week later, the next phase of their plan went into motion. Musk and Riley launched the Project Rebirth Player Alliance, an open initiative for gamers, developers, and industry professionals who believed in a better, more ethical gaming future. They created a website where players could sign up, share their stories, and even help fund the development of new games that followed the principles Musk and Riley had outlined. The response was overwhelming. Within days, thousands of players had signed up, many of them sharing heart-wrenching stories of how they had fallen victim to microtransactions or addictive game mechanics. Some players had spent their life savings on loot boxes or in-game items. Others recounted their children spending money without realizing the consequences. It was clear, the support was there. But the most important part of the initiative was the message: the future of gaming is player-driven. The alliance wasn't just about exposing the dark side of the industry, it was about building a new one. A future where players had control over their experiences, where ethical development was the standard, not the exception. As the movement grew, so did the pressure on Ether Games. They had underestimated the power of the public, the power of the players. The media coverage was intensifying, and soon, even some of their biggest partners began to question their business practices. The walls were starting to close in. One day, Musk received a call from an unexpected source. It was a high-ranking executive from Ether Games, someone who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, staying out of the public eye. But now, with the pressure mounting, this person had finally had enough. "I can't do this anymore," the voice on the other end of the phone said. "What you're doing, it's right. I've been a part of it for too long, and I can't ignore it anymore. I want out." Musk was silent for a moment. He had heard of leaks and whistleblowers in the past, but this was different. This was someone inside Ether Games who had been complicit in the manipulation, someone with the knowledge and the resources to make a real difference. "What are you saying?" Musk asked carefully. "I've got data, internal memos, access logs, financial records. All of it. I can show you exactly how the system works. How we've manipulated spending patterns. It's all in the files, and I'm willing to give it to you." Musk leaned forward, his fingers tapping the edge of his desk. "We need to meet. Now." The next night, Musk and Riley met with the whistleblower in a secure location. The individual, still anonymous for their own protection, handed over a flash drive containing what Musk believed would be the final nail in Ether Games' coffin. "I don't want any part of this anymore," the whistleblower said quietly, looking over their shoulder nervously. "I'm out." Musk nodded solemnly. "Thank you. This is bigger than just Ether Games. This is about changing the industry for good." With the new evidence in hand, they knew it was time to prepare for the next phase of the fight. This wasn't just a battle for Project Rebirth. It was a battle for the future of the entire gaming industry. And they were ready to take it to the next level. The weeks following the launch of Project Rebirth were a blur of interviews, strategic meetings, and negotiations. The player alliance had exploded into a force to be reckoned with, garnering widespread attention. It wasn't just about Musk and Riley anymore, it was about the future of an entire generation of gamers. They had tapped into something bigger than themselves, something that had been brewing beneath the surface for years. But the fight wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. As the public rallied behind them, Ether Games went on the defensive. The company launched a counteroffensive, using every tool at its disposal to discredit Musk and Riley. They deployed a well-funded media blitz, flooding news outlets with their own version of events. Reeves' public persona was now more aggressive than ever, painting Musk as a dangerous force out to destabilize the industry. Musk and Riley are no friends to innovation, he said in one interview. They are self-righteous extremists who want to tear down what we've built, all in the name of their so-called ethics. The attacks were relentless, but Musk and Riley stood firm. The legal battles raged on, but the whistleblower's evidence, those critical internal documents from Ether Games, were now in the hands of their legal team. It wasn't just a fight for the truth anymore. They had something more powerful, proof. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, Musk received a message from Riley. She'd been working through the night, combing through the flash drive they'd received from the whistleblower. He'd expected new information, but what she had uncovered was something even more startling. "Musk, you need to see this," Riley's message read. He rushed to the office, his mind racing. The atmosphere in the headquarters had shifted from hopeful to tense. People were nervous, uncertain of how long the legal battles would drag on, but Musk had learned to trust Riley's instincts. If she was calling him in, it was for something big. Riley was already waiting at the desk, her eyes bloodshot but focused. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is it. This is the piece that could bring Ether Games to its knees. Musk leaned over her shoulder, scanning the documents on her screen. It was a series of encrypted emails, but this time, the names attached to them weren't just low-level employees. These emails were from Reeve himself, the CEO of Ether Games. The messages detailed a series of meetings between Reeve and high-level investors, where they discussed not only the manipulation of players but also a plan to block any attempts at regulation. They had even discussed lobbying politicians to ensure that any gaming reform would never see the light of day. Riley tapped the screen, highlighting a particular message. "This one's the kicker. It's a conversation between Reeve and one of his investors. They're discussing the long-term strategy for maintaining control over the gaming market, and how to use psychological manipulation to increase the company's bottom line." Musk's blood ran cold as he read through the email. They had proof now, not just that Ether Games was exploiting players, but that the company had been deliberately working to undermine any potential oversight or reform. It was more than just bad business practices, it was a full-scale manipulation of the entire gaming ecosystem. "This changes everything," Musk muttered, his voice tight with anger. They knew exactly what they were doing. Riley nodded. "It's not just about money, Musk. It's about power. They want to control the entire industry, and they'll do anything to make sure no one gets in their way." The next move was clear. Musk and Riley had to take this new evidence public. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. If they were going to win this war, they had to deliver the final blow. They called a press conference, but this time, it wasn't just about exposing Ether Games' manipulation, it was about showing the world the true scope of the company's plans. They were going to take the fight straight to the heart of the problem, the investors and the corrupt system that enabled companies like Ether Games to thrive at the expense of players. The press conference was set for the following week. This time, however, the stakes were higher. The world was watching, and the industry was on edge. Would the pressure from the public, combined with the mounting legal battles, be enough to topple Ether Games? Or would Reeve's deep pockets and influence be enough to keep the juggernaut afloat? The day of the press conference arrived, and Musk and Riley stood at the podium, the weight of the moment heavy on their shoulders. The room was packed, reporters, camera crews, and industry insiders all eager to see what they would reveal next. Musk could feel the eyes of the world on him, but his focus was unwavering. "Thank you all for coming," Riley began, her voice clear and confident. "We've spent the last few months exposing the exploitation that has been running rampant in the gaming industry, and today, we're here to show you the full extent of the truth." Musk stepped forward, holding up a tablet for the crowd to see. The screen lit up, displaying the damning emails from Reeve and the investors. He read aloud from one of the most incriminating messages: "The key to ensuring long-term profitability is to continue pushing the boundaries of psychological manipulation in our games. If we maintain control over the market, we can ensure that any regulatory efforts are blocked before they gain traction. The public will never understand what's happening behind the scenes, and we will continue to profit from it." The room went silent. The reporters were furiously typing, capturing every word. Musk let the weight of the evidence sink in before continuing. "We now have undeniable proof that Ether Games, and its CEO, Reeve, have been systematically manipulating players for years. But what's worse is that they've been actively working to prevent any changes to a system that hurts players, especially the most vulnerable." Riley spoke next, her voice steady but filled with determination. "This isn't just about one company. This is about the entire gaming industry. This is about all of us, developers, players, and fans, coming together to demand better. We deserve a gaming world that respects our time, our money, and our well-being." The tension in the room was palpable. The media, the industry insiders, and even the public were beginning to understand the full magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a call to action. And the fight was far from over. The world was watching. For the first time in months, the momentum had truly shifted. Musk and Riley had just delivered the knockout punch to Ether Games at the press conference, and now, the pressure was mounting. The media was in a frenzy, outlets around the world broadcasting the shocking evidence that Musk and Riley had laid bare. The emails from Reeve, the confirmation of deliberate manipulation, the shocking truth about the corporate underpinnings of the gaming giant, it was all out in the open. But while the public rallied behind them, with social media flooded with messages of support for Project Rebirth, Musk and Riley knew they couldn't afford to relax. They weren't done yet. They couldn't just watch the chips fall where they may. They had to finish what they'd started. Reeve wasn't going down without a fight. The next few days were a blur of legal documents, emergency meetings, and frantic calls. Musk had expected this, he knew Reeve wouldn't take this lying down, but the magnitude of Ether Games' counterattack still shocked him. The company had unleashed a wave of retaliatory lawsuits against Musk, Riley, and anyone involved in the player alliance. They accused Musk and Riley of conspiracy, arguing that they were actively attempting to sabotage the gaming industry itself. They had the funds to fight back for years if need be, and they weren't going to let a couple of whistleblowers take them down without a brutal war. Musk paced in the war room, his fingers drumming on the table as he stared at the mountain of legal paperwork before him. "They're trying to drown us in legal fees and public confusion," Musk muttered. "We have to hit them harder. And we have to do it now." Riley nodded, looking over the court filings. "We need to take this to a place they can't touch. We've got the public behind us, Musk. But we need to make sure the gaming community feels it in their bones. They have to know this fight is for them. We need a rallying cry," Musk said, the idea sparking in his mind. "Something big. Something that forces the issue into the public's consciousness. Something that says we're not going anywhere. We're rebuilding this industry, not just trying to tear it down." That night, Musk made a decision. He called an emergency meeting with Riley and the core team of Project Rebirth. They were going to organize a global event, a massive, live-streamed event that would put the spotlight back on the players, developers, and creators who believed in a different future for gaming. This was more than just a press release or a viral tweet. This was going to be the turning point. The event would be a statement. This wasn't just Musk versus Reeve. This was a movement that transcended two people. It was the future of gaming at stake. They decided to hold the event in the form of a massive, multi-city gaming tournament, streamed live across multiple platforms. The format would allow players from all over the world to compete in a series of games, ones that were both revolutionary in design and devoid of predatory practices like loot boxes or pay-to-win mechanics. They would showcase the very ideals Musk and Riley had been fighting for: fairness, transparency, and player-first design. The weeks leading up to the event were an exercise in constant pressure and intense coordination. Project Rebirth's team had to secure partnerships with various indie developers who believed in their vision for gaming. Musk called on his network, reaching out to influential figures in the gaming world who were sympathetic to the cause. Some were reluctant at first, afraid of the backlash they might face from Ether Games' well-established influence. But as the momentum built, many of them realized the importance of standing up for what was right. Meanwhile, Ether Games was scrambling. The company's stock had taken a significant hit following the press conference, and its reputation was in tatters. Investors were becoming nervous, and Reeve's ability to keep the situation under control was slipping. But the CEO was a master at navigating corporate warfare. He doubled down on his strategy, promising even more legal action against Musk and Riley, while also attempting to discredit the Project Rebirth event in every way possible. He released a statement to the media: "This is not about gaming. This is about corporate sabotage and misinformation. Project Rebirth is an effort to destabilize the industry and undermine the players who enjoy Ether Games' innovations. Don't let a few radicals fool you. The truth will come out." But Reeve was losing ground. The cracks were visible, even if he was trying to patch them up. His statements were becoming less convincing, and the more he spoke, the more the gaming community seemed to push back against him. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The Rebirth Gaming Tournament would go live from 4 major cities: Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, and Berlin. The event was designed to showcase a new standard for gaming, one that was rooted in fairness and transparency. Thousands of players from across the world had already signed up, and millions more were expected to tune in to the live streams. It was a global movement, and the world was about to witness it firsthand. The atmosphere was electric. As the event kicked off, players began streaming live, competing in games that adhered to the principles Project Rebirth had outlined. No microtransactions. No pay-to-win systems. Just skill-based gameplay that celebrated the artistry of game design and the dedication of players. Musk and Riley watched from a small control room, their hearts pounding as the event unfolded. Every moment felt like a pivotal point in the battle for the future of gaming. The live chat streams were flooded with support, and social media exploded with tweets, posts, and hashtags like #RebirthTheGame and #FutureOfGaming trending globally. But even as they saw their movement gaining massive momentum, they knew they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. The world had not yet seen the full extent of Ether Games' manipulation. And while the tournament was a victory for the moment, the fight for true change had only just begun. That night, as the event came to a close, the message was clear. The gaming community had spoken. And it wasn't going back to the way things were. The question now was, how far would Ether Games go to hold on to its power? As the live stream shut down, Musk stood in front of the control room window, looking out at the city lights below. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment to savor the victory. For the first time in months, the future of gaming seemed like it was truly in the hands of the players. The Rebirth Gaming Tournament was an unprecedented success. Millions of people across the globe tuned in to watch, engaging with the content in ways Musk and Riley had never anticipated. The movement was no longer just a spark, it was an inferno, blazing through the gaming world, and the industry couldn't ignore it any longer. Yet, for all the celebrations, the underlying tension remained. Ether Games had been rattled, but Reeve, ever the cunning strategist, wasn't ready to let go of his empire so easily. The tournament was just a momentary victory, a shining example of what was possible when players and developers came together for a common cause. But Musk and Riley knew that they had only just begun to expose the full depth of the corruption. The day after the event, Musk was on a call with Riley. The sound of her voice crackling through the speakerphone was a familiar comfort, but even she couldn't mask the exhaustion in her tone. "We've got their attention now," Riley said. "But we still have a lot of work to do." Reeves not backing down. In fact, he's already planning his counterattack. Musk leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the sprawling cityscape. "I know. But this tournament, it showed the world that we don't need their manipulation. We don't need Ether Games' monopoly on the industry. People are waking up to the truth, Riley." Riley's voice was firm, resolute. "The truth is what we're fighting for. And we're not just fighting Ether Games anymore. We're fighting a system, a corrupt, broken system that's been in place for decades. This fight is bigger than us. It's about future generations of gamers. They need a world where they're treated fairly, where their time and money aren't exploited." Musk nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had been caught in the whirlwind of media appearances and legal strategies, but at the core of it all, the battle had always been about something much bigger. It was about the integrity of an entire industry. "We need to strike fast," Musk said, determination in his voice. "We can't wait for them to regroup. We have to go for the jugular. If we're going to tear down Ether Games, we need to make sure the world knows what they're really about." That very day, Riley initiated the final phase of their strategy. She and Musk had spent the last few weeks collaborating with top journalists, independent developers, and influencers to collect even more evidence that would expose Ether Games for what it truly was, a company built on lies, greed, and manipulation. But Riley wasn't just interested in exposing Ether Games. She had a bigger plan. If they were going to take down the giant, they had to disrupt the very foundation that allowed companies like Ether Games to thrive, their deep ties with politicians, investors, and lobbyists. Riley and Musk released a new report, The Corruption at the Heart of the Gaming Industry. The report not only detailed Ether Games' internal practices, but it also revealed the extent of the company's involvement with politicians who had worked behind the scenes to ensure that gaming remained largely unregulated. They had effectively prevented any oversight on predatory microtransactions, data privacy violations, and the addiction-driven mechanics that plagued the industry. In a series of public statements, Musk and Riley accused Ether Games of using its vast resources to influence policy, ensuring that legislation that would protect gamers from exploitation never reached a vote. They named names, politicians who had been paid handsomely by Ether Games lobbyists to block any meaningful change in the system. The backlash was immediate. The media exploded with stories detailing the corruption and the collusion between Ether Games and the political establishment. For the first time, the veil had been lifted from the behind-the-scenes dealings that had kept the gaming industry under the control of a few wealthy individuals. It wasn't just about manipulating players, it was about manipulating the entire system to protect the interests of a few at the expense of the many. But Reeve wasn't going to go down quietly. He called an emergency press conference of his own, trying to salvage what was left of his company's image. The media was relentless, questioning his role in the scandals and his company's ties to the politicians Musk and Riley had exposed. Reeve, ever the master manipulator, tried to deflect, claiming that Musk and Riley were anti-gaming radicals who wanted to destroy the very thing that brought people joy. "The truth is simple," Reeve said in his carefully crafted speech. "This isn't about protecting players or revolutionizing the gaming industry. This is about a personal vendetta. Musk and Riley are trying to tear down the foundation of gaming because they're afraid of losing control. But we won't be bullied. We won't back down." Despite his attempts to spin the situation, the damage was done. The truth had spread too far, and even Reeve's most loyal supporters were beginning to question his motives. Investors pulled their support, and Ether Games began to hemorrhage money. The company's stock plummeted further, and it became clear that the once mighty titan was teetering on the edge of collapse. In the aftermath of the report, Musk and Riley's movement gained unstoppable momentum. Players, developers, and even other companies began to rally behind Project Rebirth. Small indie studios that had once struggled to get noticed now saw an opportunity to rise. They rallied around the ideals of transparency, fairness, and player-first design that Musk and Riley had championed. It was the birth of a new gaming ecosystem, one built on trust, collaboration, and respect for the player. But Musk knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Ether Games might be on its last legs, but the system that allowed it to thrive was still very much in place. Reeve had already started making deals with other powerful corporations, trying to keep his empire intact in the face of collapse. There would be no easy victory in this war. "We're not just fighting for today," Musk said to Riley as they prepared for the next phase. "We're fighting for the future. We have to make sure Ether Games isn't just toppled. We have to change the entire system, so something like this can never happen again." Riley nodded, the same fire in her eyes that had driven her since the beginning. "Let's finish what we started." The day had arrived. The fight for the future of gaming was no longer a battle against one corrupt company, it was a battle to redefine the very essence of the industry. Ether Games was on its last legs, reeling from the explosive revelations Musk and Riley had unleashed. The gaming world was watching, waiting to see whether the giant would fall, and if so, what would rise from its ashes. Musk and Riley had spent the past few weeks preparing for this moment, the final confrontation that would either seal the fate of Ether Games or see them rise victorious. It wasn't just about taking down Reeve's empire anymore. It was about ensuring that the lessons learned in this fight would leave an indelible mark on the gaming industry for years to come. They had come too far to let it slip away now. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense. Musk sat at the head of the table, his face drawn and weary, but his eyes were sharp. Riley sat beside him, her expression focused, as always. They had gathered their closest allies, indie developers, players, journalists, and a few remaining investors who had remained loyal to their cause. They had one final, crucial move to make. "We have everything we need," Riley said, her voice calm but laced with determination. "The final report is ready, and we've secured support from enough players, influencers, and developers to ensure that the message gets through. This is our moment." Musk leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "But it's not just about Ether Games anymore. It's about the entire system. The corruption that runs through the veins of the industry. If we don't dismantle that, then we haven't really won, have we?" Riley nodded. "We've already shifted the tide. Now we need to make sure we hold the line. We need a plan that will ensure Ether Games can't rise again. We need to show the world that it's possible to have a gaming industry that is fair, transparent, and focused on the players." They had already made a significant impact, but the real battle lay in creating lasting change. The system was deeply entrenched, and the corporate interests that had supported Ether Games were still out there, waiting for an opportunity to prop up the next giant. Musk and Riley knew they had to strike now, before the opportunity slipped through their fingers. The next day, they launched their final assault. In a coordinated move, Musk and Riley released a video message to the gaming community, one that would be streamed live across multiple platforms. The video was raw, personal, and powerful, capturing the heart of the movement they had created. Musk spoke first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "The time has come for us to make a choice. For too long, we've allowed powerful corporations to control the gaming world. We've been manipulated, taken advantage of, and promised a future that was never ours to begin with. Ether Games is just the beginning. The system that allowed them to thrive is still in place. But that's about to change." Riley stepped forward, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "We've seen what can happen when we come together, when we demand better. Project Rebirth isn't just about taking down Ether Games. It's about creating a future where players, developers, and creators have the power. A future where gaming is about passion, creativity, and fairness. It's about making sure that the voices of the players are heard and respected. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had fought for. They weren't just calling for the downfall of one company, they were calling for a revolution. The response from the community was nothing short of overwhelming. The video went viral within minutes, and social media platforms were flooded with messages of support. Gamers, developers, and influencers rallied behind the cause, using the hashtags #RebirthTheGame and #FutureOfGaming to show their solidarity. The momentum had reached a fever pitch, and Ether Games was now facing a public relations nightmare. But Reeve wasn't finished yet. Desperate to retain control, he called for a last-ditch press conference, hoping to salvage his reputation and salvage what remained of Ether Games. "We will not be bullied into submission," Reeve declared in his usual polished tone, standing before a sea of cameras. "This campaign is nothing more than an attempt to disrupt the gaming industry and destroy the livelihoods of thousands of dedicated professionals. Ether Games is a cornerstone of the industry, and we will fight to protect it." But even as he spoke, the tide had already turned. The evidence against Ether Games was too damning. The corruption was too blatant. The world was no longer buying his words. Musk and Riley knew that the press conference was Reeve's final play, and it would fail just as spectacularly as everything else he had attempted. The gaming community had already made its decision. They were done with Ether Games. They were done with the corporate greed that had tainted the very essence of gaming. And then, the inevitable happened. The next morning, Ether Games announced that it would be filing for bankruptcy. Reeve's empire, once an unassailable force in the gaming world, had crumbled. The company's stock value plummeted to zero, and the investors who had supported it began pulling their funds. The corporate giant had fallen, and with it, the system that had allowed it to thrive. But for Musk and Riley, the victory was bittersweet. They had torn down a titan, but they knew that the battle for the future of gaming was far from over. The system was still broken. The interests of powerful corporations still held sway over too many decisions. The only way forward was to continue pushing for a better, more transparent future, a future where players and creators could thrive without fear of exploitation. As the dust settled, Musk stood in front of a crowd at a press event, his expression solemn but hopeful. Riley stood beside him, her gaze resolute. "We've won the battle," Musk said, his voice carrying over the microphone. "But the war is just beginning. It's not enough to tear down the giants. We need to build something better, something that will last. We need to build an industry that values people over profits. An industry that listens to the players, the creators, the developers. Together, we can create a world where gaming isn't about exploiting people, it's about celebrating the things that make gaming great: community, creativity, and passion." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound reverberating through the room. The victory wasn't just Musk and Riley's, it was the victory of every gamer, every developer, every player who had ever felt the sting of corporate greed. It was a victory for the future. As the cameras flashed and the cheers continued, Musk and Riley exchanged a look, one of quiet understanding. The world had changed. They had changed it. And while their journey wasn't over, they knew they had done something incredible. They had reshaped the future of gaming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?